A listener warning. Please be advised that this episode contains content that may be disturbing to some listeners, including descriptions of violence. Listener discretion is advised.
Life upon the wicked stage ain't ever what a girl supposes.
I'm Jen.
I'm Ashley.
And I'm Olivia.
And we are, in fact, three different people.
This podcast focuses on true crime under the spotlight of arts and entertainment. So grab your beverage of choice and settle in.
Places, ladies.
Here's our episode.
Intermission is over.
We're back.
Act 2.
Same day for us, but not for you guys.
Act 2, the same thing that killed Abraham Lincoln. Spoiler alert.
What? Lincoln's dead.
What a segue.
One way or the other, I hate to break it to your friends that this person who was alive in the 1860s is no longer with us today.
Lee.
One way or another.
I saw a thing. It was something about like the Titanic. Somebody was like pissed. They're like, spoilers much? It was like Friends.
One way or another.
So when we left off, it was April 12th of 1865. The South had surrendered. Robert E. Lee had signed for peace at Appomattox Courthouse, and John Wilkes Booth heard this, and he had said, "You know what? Screw it.
My watch.
Not on my watch. I am forgoing my career as an actor, and the only thing I care about is assassinating Lincoln." So this is April of 1865. The formerly kidnapped, now assassination plot is in full swing.
Well, he must have had somebody else in his ear, don't you think? Like,
I don't know.
Seems so. I don't know. It seems so.
Or
we're going to get into this in this part, Olivia, because the why of all of this is something that, not to ruin it, I don't know that we have a totally clear smoking gun, but I think we have a lot of context clues to say why. I think we have a lot of context surrounding this, and you know, it's subject to some interpretation and opinions, but in my opinion, I think we do know why. And unfortunately, I think a lot of the reasons for it are still persisting today. And there are people who are still struggling with some of these same thoughts. So in the words of Stephen Sondheim, he said, "Hunt me down, smear my name, say I did it for the fame. What I did was kill the man who killed my country. Now the Southland will mend. Now this bloody war can end, because someone slew the tyrant just as Brutus slew the tyrant." So on the morning of Good Friday, which was April 14th.
Good Friday.
Sure was. It was Good Friday. So draw your Judas Iscariot comparisons now.
So when we go through the drive-through crucifixion, we should be thinking of this.
But also, yes. Mm-hmm. Yep. Talking about conspiracies and plots. It was Good Friday, April 14th, 1865 was Good Friday. Booth, who, as we established in part 1, was not only a national celebrity as a well-known actor, but he was a regular at Ford's Theater because he had performed there more than once and was known. He was presently staying in the DC area, so he went to Ford's Theater to get his mail because, sometimes if
It's like his mailbox. It was like
he had like a little mailbox there.
Yeah.
It was
He
like,
came to get his fan mail.
yes,
Right.
it was exactly it. Yeah, from all his thirsty bitches, as the kids would say. He's like, you know what? It's not going well. The South has fallen, but I still got to get my fan mail from the
Hold
ladies.
on, let me go. I gotta feel better about myself and life in general. Hold on.
Priorities, right? Yeah. It's not funny, but it's kind of funny that he was like, well,
you have to find the joy in life in these moments, you know.
got to see if one of my situationships has like sent me a text.
Like one last thirst trap. Here we go.
Truly. So he's at Ford's Theater. He's picking up his mail from his fans, and he is told whilst there that just, in passing, hey, guess what? This is cool. The president, Lincoln, and his wife are going to be attending our show tonight, which was Our American Cousin. Isn't that great? Wow, what a time. Oh, and P.S., Ulysses S. Grant and his wife are going to be their plus ones.
Right. That's right.
So,
I forgot about that.
Yeah, it was supposed to be Grant. So Booth is like, what's that you say? So immediately sets about to put the assassination plot in action and is like, all right, stop what you're doing, everybody. It's happening. Because again, he had been like, okay, that's it. I'm going to assassinate Lincoln. But they had this kidnapping plot. They had a couple scenarios for the kidnapping plot, but this assassination piece of it is still kind of fresh. It's like, how are we going to do this? When are we going to do this? We don't know. It's like, it wasn't really very well laid out at that point.
So there wasn't other people involved.
I was just going to say.
It was all the same people from the kidnap plot.
Everybody else was still in on it.
Okay.
Same
So
panic, different disco.
Wolf. It was, well, okay, got it.
No, not a lone wolf. Same panic, different disco. He's like, we're doing the same show, but we're doing it on roller skates now. Yeah, it was.
Xanadu.
Xanadu, no. So later that night at 8:45, which also asterisk, what time did this play start? At 8:45 p.m., Booth informed, again, our conspirators, same people from part 1, Powell, Herod, and Atzerodt of his intention to kill Lincoln. So he assigned Powell to assassinate Secretary of State William H. Seward, and Atzerodt was going to assassinate Vice President Andrew Johnson. So this had now turned into, by the way, it's not just Lincoln. We are going to take down
everybody.
We're going to take down everyone who is essentially at the top of the United States government. Presumably, because Grant was supposed to be in attendance, Booth was also going to kill Grant in addition to Lincoln at the theater. So Booth was like, I've got these two, the head of the Union Army, and then you're going to kill the vice president so he can't take over, and also you're going to kill Secretary of State. Herod was going to assist in the escape plan. So then they were all going to, do what they did essentially simultaneously. They were going to, all three of these assassinations were going to happen at the same time. And then they were all going to flee to Virginia, which, reminder, that was the capital of the Confederacy. So the war is over, the South has surrendered, but that was still where it's like, hey, there's a whole bunch of people, in theory, in Richmond, Virginia, who would be sympathetic to us and at the very least maybe like hide us or help us get away from there. So the possibility of assassinating Grant was fortunately, was foiled because at the last minute, Grant declined the invitation because his wife was like, hey, you've had a lot going on, with the war. She was like,
staying tonight.
Yes, literally. She was like, let's order a pizza. And the Grants left Washington that evening by train to visit family in New Jersey because she was like, you need a break. Just let's get out of town.
Let's Netflix and chill, hun.
Yes.
And chill.
Yep.
Yeah. Mrs. Grant was like, we're going to Netflix and chill.
Yeah.
So sorry, can't go to the theater. So Booth had hoped that the assassination, the goal behind this now, again, we've had a shift in the plot here. So his thought behind the assassination, and this is documented, was that it was going to create sufficient chaos in the Union so that the fallen Confederate government could reorganize and continue/restart the war, or bare minimum that it would avenge the South. So plan A, the hope was like, oh, we've taken out all your leaders of the Union so we can just start again and say, oh, hey, remember when we surrendered a couple days ago? Never mind. We're going to take backsies and we're going to restart this war so that we can, at the very least, like keep the Confederacy going, keep separate. We don't want to be part of the Union. We don't want slavery abolished. We want to have our own country. But failing that, at least they would say like, well, we've avenged the South, which is so gross. But those were sort of his two motivations now going into this assassination plot. So Booth spent some time at the saloon So the play starts. God only knows what time this play started. Like rules
this
of
is
theater.
why
like,
people didn't live as long back then because they went out so late.
Shows aren't starting until like 9:30 p.m. It's like curtains at 9. I'm like, what? So Booth is drinking up until intermission. So after intermission, again, see part 2. We're in danger, friends.
Yep.
I know. It's like God only knows what time this is. So after intermission, Booth enters Ford's Theater at 10:10 p.m. So in the theater, he slips into, there's like if you've been in the theater, and this is not uncommon of the way like theaters with like box seating are still structured. So it's like there is the orchestra seating, and then there'll be like, the mezzanine and or the balcony. Right. But then there are usually like hallways that sort of like wrap around the side. And then there'll be like individual either doorways or openings into the spaces where like the quote box seats are, like kind of flanking the side of the theater. Sometimes they overlap the stage, and sometimes they sit a little bit behind the stage. The presidential box in Ford's Theater, it's the one that is the closest to the stage, and it does overlap a little bit with like the thrust or in front of the proscenium of that theater. So at 10:10 he's in the theater. At 10:14 he slips into the box. So there's like curtains, and then the box, like the presidential box, actually has its own doorway. So he's kind of like, he's out of the hallway, but he's not, he's like almost like behind, like he's behind a curtain, if you will. He's within the box, but like no one knows he's there yet. Right. He's very stealthy. With him, he had his pistol.
It's those
what now?
Was calf muscles. They allow.
Yeah, he's so stealthy.
He and his calf muscles. He is tiptoed into the box. So with him, he has a small gun, and then he also has a knife. So he knows
both.
He has 2 weapons on him, because again, he's also thinking, and we'll get into this in a second, but he's thinking, okay, I'm going to shoot Lincoln, and then I'm going to stab Grant. Not clear whether or not at this point he knew that Grant was not in attendance, because the last minute Grant had bowed out. So Lincoln they had invited just other friends of theirs, Major Henry Rathbone and his fiance, to come and sit with them in the box. So Grant was not there. Not sure if Booth knew Grant or not, but plan A, shoot Lincoln. Plan B, stab, presumably, Grant. So Booth knows the play because he's worked there a bunch. He knows plays. There's only so many plays out there in the repertoire. Right. But he knew the script of Our American Cousin. And so he knew there's a particular moment in the show where there's a really, really big laugh coming. The audience is going to erupt in a big laugh. And he waited for the laugh to mask the shot. He held for the laugh. Oh my God. He held for the laugh. So at the exact moment where the audience erupts into the biggest laugh of the show, he steps out of the shadows, points his weapon, and fires once.
Wow.
So here's a crazy thing that you may or may not know. Booth famously used a Derringer handgun, which people are like, what is the significance of the Derringer? It was called a Philadelphia Derringer, and this is the type of gun that Booth used. It contains one shot. It has one barrel, and it contains one bullet. That's why he needs a knife.
I was wondering, why didn't he shoot both? Okay.
And this is frankly ballsy, because it's like, in theory, no pun intended, but like in theory, he's a celebrity. He could have come in with a concealed pistol with like multiple shots or other things and had it just like, no one was going to check him or frisk him. There wasn't like security, because reminder, he's a celebrity, and there was like, oh yeah, welcome. You can go wherever you want in the theater. No one's going to check you.
It's like one of us going into like the Ice House or Bay Street.
Yeah,
no,
it's like,
guys, we're not going to do it, but it's like us walking in and going up to the booth and hanging out with Darlin and watching the show.
No one's going to think anything of it. So boldly, he has this very tiny handgun. It's generally the smallest usable handgun of any caliber, given the barrel length. It's really, really short barrel length. So it was frequently used by women, because it was easily concealed in a purse or a stocking, which like a purse at the time was like a little tiny, like drawstring bag, like a small bag.
Or a corset.
Yeah, but here's the crazy thing. Accuracy of this gun, because again, it was so little, It was highly variable, meaning not a super accurate weapon. So it was infamously intended for point and shoot use instead of aim and shoot, meaning like you could point it, but like all bets were off as to whether or not it would actually fire the way you pointed it, because it was because the barrel was so short and it was so variable. So they said it was intended for, quote, poker table distances. And it was professional gamblers often carried it because it was like you could just reach across the poker table and shoot someone who pissed you off.
They use this in Maverick. They talk about it in Maverick.
Do they?
Because Annabelle has one in Maverick and they make fun of her for it.
That's such a great
I never put that together.
Philadelphia Derringer. So, but gamblers were like sort of known to carry this, but because it would also jam really easily and you had to like clean it and reload it and fire it daily to keep it in like good working order, because it was just like, this gun was a piece of shit, but it was easily concealed. So Derringer's production records indicate that these were almost always sold in matching pairs to compensate for the limited power of the single shot, the short barrel, and also for like the limited reliability. So it's like, hey, if I try to shoot the first one in A, I miss, or B, it jams because it doesn't always work, I have another one. So it was like, choo, choo. Like that was, pew, pew. Yeah, Derringers. Yeah. So it was really popular among civilians. He's also got the knife, but again, I'm like, plan A was the gun. So like a bold move. So
there is a huge chance that it wouldn't have hit Lincoln.
Or A wouldn't have hit Lincoln, or B would have jammed and not even fired. Or would have jammed it,
like he wouldn't have actually been assassinated.
Well, or plan B would have been to stab him, but that's like, that's trickier, that's messier. That's harder, yes, like exactly. That's way harder to kill someone outright with stabbery. There are other
people in the box that could have stopped Booth.
Yes, unfortunately for history and for everyone, the Derringer, it worked that time, and he
fascinating.
Yeah, so he shot him at almost point blank range. Yeah. So it was almost impossible. He frankly would have missed.
It really would have been only if it misfired at that point.
Yeah, if it hadn't fired at all, that would have been the only way he would have missed him. But he did shoot him in the back of the head. The audience initially were like, wait, what? Like there was a split second of silence, it was said, and then people erupted in screams because they saw like Lincoln was slumping forward, and Mary Todd Lincoln, his wife, also started to scream. So Booth's escape was almost thwarted by Major Henry Rathbone, the substitute +1, supposed to be Grant, but was also sitting in the box. So Major Henry Rathbone, who was like a younger guy, kind of jumped in and was like trying to stop him or wrestle him. But remember, Booth has this big old knife. So he pulls out his knife and he stabbed Rathbone in the arm, like pretty severely. Like he needed like major like surgery to correct this. Like I don't know where in the arm, but like he lost a ton of blood. It was a pretty major injury. Rathbone's fiance, Clara Harris, and Mary Todd Lincoln, they were not harmed. So Booth
chivalrous.
I know, right? It's like, don't stab the ladies. Like, ugh. So
Mary Todd Lincoln, I think, could have taken him though. She was.
she could have if she hadn't been so in shock. I'm sure. Like,
do you know though that she had a premonition?
Yes. Talk about that, Olivia.
So I did not pre-research this, so nobody quote me on it, the exact details. But I believe she had a dream or something where, I don't know if he was shot, but something bad happened to him at the show.
He was dead, yeah.
Yeah, and she told him she didn't want him to go. We shouldn't go. So whereas Grant's wife was like, hey, let's stay home, Mary Todd did the same thing, but she'd had a premonition, a dream, a vision that something was going to happen to him. And he, kind of poo-pooed it. And they went anyway.
Gentlemen, if you are listening to this podcast, and if your female presenting wife or significant other is like, hey, I've got some bad vibes about this, maybe we shouldn't, listen to them.
Yeah.
Listen to us.
Lady vibes save lives.
It's true. We have a gut feeling and we listen to them, and you need to.
Yep.
Just don't question it as much as it might seem ridiculous. Like we might be saving your life from assassination. Who's to say?
Yeah.
So Booth, after he stabs Major Henry Rathbone, he then jumps from the president's box to the stage. It's about a 12-foot drop, so significant. He apparently, accounts on this differ, including, I'm going to read from Booth's own diary. This is interesting. So the initial account says he was wearing spurs on his boots because, remember, he's going to make an escape attempt. He knows he's about to get on a horse faster because he's about to escape in a minute. He knows this. So as he's jumping from the box, allegedly his spur caught on the flag bunting and sort of made him like fall, like twist as he fell, which is what broke his leg. Another account separately says, and this is true, Booth was shot accidentally several years before by a friend. Like, it wasn't like a hostile situation. He was like with a friend. The friend was like cleaning a pistol or like doing something with a pistol and shot him accidentally in the hip. And that he had essentially had an old like hip injury, and the way his hip had healed, it sort of compromised the overall strength of his legs on that side. So when he fell, because he was weaker on that side, the way he compensated when he fell caused his leg to break because his hip was weaker on that side. I'm going to read the account from his diary because this is the part where I was like, well, hold on now. Let's see. Here we go. So, yeah. I just want to find the excerpt. Oh, one more thing. So he jumped from the box, and then whether or not he broke his leg jumping or not, debatable. But then he jumped to the stage, he raised the bloody knife, and he shouts, "Sic semper tyrannis," which is Latin for "thus always to tyrants," and is attributed to the character of Brutus during Julius Caesar's assassination.
You really also yourself with Brutus.
I know, right? Also, this "Sic semper tyrannis" was the state motto of Virginia.
What was his dad's middle name?
Brutus.
Yeah.
And his brother Edwin is known for playing Brutus in Julius Caesar. So a lot of Brutus.
Was he the reincarnation of Brutus?
What?
Was he the reincarnation of Brutus?
I mean, he certainly fancied himself that. According to some accounts, he might have also shouted, "The South is avenged."
Or I heard "the South will rise again." That's what I've always heard.
So here's in his diary. Now, he wrote this entry while he was on the run, so it wasn't like that day he didn't write this, but this was within a couple of days. He wrote, "I struck boldly, and not as the papers say. I walked with a firm step through 1,000 of his friends, was stopped but pushed on. A colonel was at his side." Not a colonel, major. We'll let it go. "I shouted, 'Sic semper tyrannis,' before I fired. In jumping, broke my leg. I passed all his pickets, rode 60 miles that night with the bones of my leg tearing the flesh at every jump. I can never repent it, though we hated to kill. Our country owed all our troubles to him, and God simply made me the instrument of his punishment. The country is not what it was." So Booth himself says that he broke his leg in the fall. Another account says that like he actually didn't break his leg at all in the fall, and this was actually based on what some theater goers said. It's like, well, his leg couldn't have been broken, he ran out so fast. And it's like adrenaline, ladies and gentlemen.
Right.
And they said that his leg was broken later when he was fleeing, that his horse fell on him and broke his leg then. But the fact that he might have broken his leg in a fall from his horse was a lie he told to people while he was on the run because he had a broken leg. And they're like, "How did you break your leg?" And he's like, "Oh, I fell from a horse, not killing the president." So that's where it got a little muddy. But based on his own diary entry, he broke his leg when he jumped to the stage. He says he shouted "Sic semper tyrannis" before he fired, which I think is so interesting because that would have meant it came from nowhere. Like people wouldn't have known, like, did he say it? Because the audience seems to remember him standing on the stage with a knife saying "Sic semper tyrannis." So it's like That's
Also,
very interesting.
if he had said that behind Lincoln would have turned around.
Right.
So
Right. And the audience was laughing, so no one else would have even heard it.
Right.
Yeah. It's an interesting detail. So I'm like, did he write that in his journal, like for dramatic effect?
Yeah.
I'm going to say the line right before I kill him.
Yeah.
Or like, what was it?
We'll read his journal at some point. He wanted it this way.
When did he write this in his journal? Because he was running for his life.
It's
and then
somewhere,
he, is in a barn that's burning up.
It's somewhere between the journal. It's open because he stopped when he was on the run. He stopped dating specific dates, but it says between April 17th and 22nd.
Wow.
So sometime in there, he was like, I'm going to make.
Hold on.
Yeah, I'm going to do a little recap.
Let me just
exactly
make sure the world knows what I want them to know.
Well, and again, like some of it's
interesting, right?
Yeah, and like some of it's like you said, like your dramatic recounting because he was very intentional about like some assassins have really well documented, I'll say, like journals or manifestos, and those are also, I think, the people who tend to be more organized in their crimes and in their thinking, as opposed to people like we talked last week about Hinckley, who tried to assassinate President Reagan. He was out of his freaking mind.
Right. He just wanted to impress Jodie Foster.
He wanted to impress Jodie Foster and was like kind of low key stalking Jodie Foster and was not really very in touch with reality. So you have someone like Hinckley who's just, kind of like not playing with a full deck of cards versus you have Booth, who has like a well-planned, well-documented, like methodical, we've got plan A, we've got plan B, and has thought this through and is more organized with his thinking. So therefore I would also think like, you're going to want people to know your reasons for like why you did this, as opposed to just like someone crazy who's like kind of like finally just like snaps and does something like out of nowhere. Like this was a long plan and a long time in coming.
And you live in a time where that's the only way that anyone's going to know anything about you. Yeah. If you write it down.
You couldn't selfie it.
Yeah. You can't.
And no one else could either, Olivia. Like there was no archival recording where it's like, oh, we're filming the show, or no one else had their phone out. Like that's not
when they did something through the gram, it was through the telegram.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Can we make a merch that says for the telegram?
That's the only merch I want from this friggin' tragic episode.
Yeah, for the telegram.
For the telegram. Doing it for the telegram. So, as we know, Lincoln was taken from Ford's Theater across the street to a house where he succumbed to his injuries the following morning around 7 a.m. So he died on April 15th, 1865.
What day was it again? April 15th, you said?
15th. Yeah, Lincoln died on the 15th. So Booth was the only one of the assassins that night to succeed. So Powell tried to stab Secretary of State Seward. Seward was actually bedridden as the result of a carriage accident, unrelated to anything. And he had an elaborate neck jaw brace because he had been like grievously injured, and the brace had metal components. So as Powell was trying to stab Seward, he was so like frantic and like trying to do it quickly and get out of there quickly. And like Seward's daughter was home and there were servants home and like people were screaming. And so he was just sort of like stabbing at him furiously. He wasn't really looking at what he was doing, and he kept hitting the brace instead of stabbing him. And like he stabbed him, but not in a way that was like gonna kill him.
Right.
So Seward was stabbed, but not like in a major like artery or organ or anything like that.
Only
like didn't
a flesh wound.
Only a flesh wound, like still like pretty major, like to be like stabbed in the face, just not like through your windpipe, like nothing that was going to kill him. So he failed to kill Seward.
There's a lot of blood involved whenever you
a lot of head wound blood. The face and head bleed a lot. And poor Secretary Seward was no exception to this, because initially I think it was his daughter had run into the room and as this was like happening, or the aftermath of this, and said like he was killed. Like they were like, oh my gosh,
she
like
thought he was dead.
Yeah, they thought he was dead. And then it was like, oh, no, he's not dead. Because, like, there was so much blood. Like, it was, horrific. But, like,
so is this all happening, like, at the same time? Like, they
pretty
coordinated
much
for it to all happen, like, at 10 o'clock. We're done drinking at the pub. We're going to go make it happen.
Yep. This was coordinated. So Atzerodt, who was supposed to kill the vice president, who was at the time living in a hotel. I'm like, this was a thing people did then instead of.
That's true.
They lived in hotels.
Yeah, like you didn't have an apartment. You're like, I'm a bachelor and I live in a hotel. Like,
I'd live in a hotel. I'd live in the plaza.
Room service. We'll do your lawn.
Wouldn't we all?
Yeah, this was a thing you could do. I'd got drunk and lost his nerve. So he was sitting in the lobby of this hotel, like, all right, waiting for, whatever time it was, like 10 p.m. to do the murdering. Got drunk, lost his nerve, and never even tried to kill Johnson. He was just like, fuck it, I can't. Like, sorry, like, I'm out.
Thank God for the drinking.
Thank God for the drinking.
Thank God for the drink. So now we are officially on the run. Mm-hmm. So Stephen Sondheim writes, damn my soul, if you must, let my body turn to dust. Let it mingle with the ashes of the country. Let them curse me to hell. Leave it to history to tell. What I did well, and I did it for my country. Let them cry, dirty traitor. They will understand it later. The country is not what it was.
I just get chills every time. Like, every time you say it, I just get chills. It's so good.
Yeah. I will say that lyric, the country is not what it was, is something like it's repeated in the Ballad of Booth, which, is in that Sondheim musical Assassins. Yeah. And I didn't realize until I read Booth's journals, that is something he writes over and over. Those are his words, not Sondheim's. And Sondheim, I'm sure, read the journals, and that's where it came from. But I was like, oh. So Booth fled the theater via the stage door to the alley. He already had a getaway horse ready for him. This was the plan all along. A co-conspirator had arranged for the horse to be there. Apparently the horse was, quote, high-spirited and would break if left unattended, so they couldn't just tie it up. They needed like a person to hold the horse.
Yeah. He's like, I am not involved. Let me out of here.
I will not be broken. How dare you?
The horse is like, I gotta go. I'm out of here. Edmund Spangler was the conspirator who had arranged for the horse.
Grandfather of Egon Spangler.
So Spangler, though, had given it to this other guy who was like a stagehand, who was just like I'm just a guy in the vicinity, Joseph Burroughs. Spangler was like, hey, hold this horse. And Burroughs is like, why? And Spangler is like, nothing to see here. Just hold this horse.
You wouldn't have to ask me.
From the 1800s that you're not here anymore. Hey, buddy, hold this horse for a second. I'll be right back.
If someone asked me to hold a horse right now, I'd be like, okay, no problem.
But like, and this was like
a horse.
And again, not an uncommon thing to do. I mean, I think maybe like slightly where it's like, why don't you tie up the horse? It's like, oh, the horse is high strung. Just hold it for a second. We'll be right out.
Because you're not going to be able to ride it in 5 minutes because he's high-spirited.
High-spirited horse. So Booth gets on his horse. He rides south to Maryland, and he's accompanied by David Harrod. So this is one of the original conspirators from the kidnapping plot. And they had planned the escape route to take advantage, specifically like sparse telegraphs or railroads or major roadways, because Harrod actually knew the area and Harrod knew the route because I think he'd traveled and hunted a lot in this vicinity where they were traveling to. So hey, like, you're a reliable person to kind of navigate maybe like the back roads or like less traversed route, because we don't want to take the main road because people will probably be looking for us.
Find us, maybe.
They might worry. So they were trying to find a route into Maryland where there would be also maybe some more sympathetic Confederate people, maybe a little bit off the grid, because remember, Maryland was a border state.
That
so there
tweener
were
state. That
there were
people
people
that we were.
Yeah, like there were people who were pro-Union, and there were also people who were for the Confederacy. So it was a little bit of a mixed bag going into Maryland there.
Yeah.
So around midnight, so this is about 2 hours after the assassination, Booth and Harrod arrive at Surratt's Tavern. So this is about 9 miles from Washington, D.C., and this was where they had stashed guns and equipment for being on the run when they were planning the kidnap plot. So they already had a cache of supplies for, hey, whenever we do this, we know this is where we can go to get stuff for our trek down to Virginia. So they're like, hey, we switched to assassination, but still we need...
And they were like the logistics the same.
Pretty much, yeah. So they continued south. They stopped just before dawn on the 15th. So this is still as Lincoln is dying across the street from the theater. So we're still just a couple hours. We're in like the wee hours of the morning because Booth has a broken leg. So as we heard from his own journals, like this is really painful. The adrenaline, I'm sure, has worn off from the initial flight out of the theater. Also riding a horse and the rhythm and pressure of that, like that's got to be doing the murder on a fracture. So they stopped at the home of Dr. Samuel Mudd. They're now about 25 miles away from Washington. So this is a debated account. So Mudd says later that Booth, he had no idea Booth had killed Lincoln, and Booth told him the injury occurred because he had fallen from his horse. So Mudd's official statement on record was, didn't know anything about the assassination. He told me he fell from a horse. I was just doing my duty as a doctor. I set his leg first, do no harm.
Yeah.
Sorry about it. Other accounts say that Mudd was a Confederate sympathizer. So it's one of those, what did he know and when? And there's really no firm evidence to say oh, he was part of it, or oh, he was just sort of known to be empathetic, or at the very least wouldn't ask too many questions, where you show up and you say, hey, it's 5 a.m. and I'm rocking up to your house with a broken leg, and you're like, oh yeah, I'll set your leg, just
that's tough because a
nothing to say.
A doctor more than anyone should be, they're supposed to do no harm to anybody.
Yeah, and also to show up at that hour of the morning with a broken leg is a little sus.
Yeah.
And I don't know how often Dr. Samuel Mudd got to the theater, but we've also established that John Wilkes Booth was a public figure. Yeah. So I was like, you look familiar. Where have I seen you?
Hottest man alive, clearly, in America at that time.
Hottest celebrity shows up at your house, you're gonna set his wedding.
If Timothy Chalamet shows up at your house at 5 a.m. it's I broke my leg.
This Dr. Mudd had the hots for John Wilkes Booth. That's what it was.
So meanwhile, the War Department has now started putting together their plan. We're going to pursue Booth. It's all hands on deck. This is the only thing we're now focused on, is tracking down these Booth. And also they have a sense they didn't know about Johnson, but they also knew the freaking secretary has also been stabbed in the face. They're seems like these things might be related. Right. So they put out an advertised reward of $100,000, which is about $2 million in today's money.
Holy shit.
For information leading to the arrest of Booth and the accomplices. There's a $2 million reward in today's money now on Booth's head. So they keep riding through Maryland. They're riding through the woods. They're trying to cross the Potomac River. I found a really good map for this, the route they took and the terrain, and why this ended up actually being kind of confusing of where did you go and why? It's not as straightforward as you might think. Part of it is because of the route they took, because they wanted to kind of stay off the beaten path.
Sure.
Basically, they were trying to get to Virginia, specifically to Richmond.
Hey friends, Jen here, and we hope you're enjoying this episode of Life Upon the Wicked Stage. Just a few quick reminders. If you're looking for any of the visuals that we've mentioned in this or any episode of the podcast, make sure to follow us on Instagram at Wicked Stage Pod or Facebook at Life Upon the Wicked Stage. If you want more, please join our Patreon by searching the Wicked Stage Podcast. There you'll find ad-free episodes, videos of our recordings, mini-sodes, behind-the-scenes content, giveaways, and so much more. And the most important side note, if you like the show, please give us a nice rating wherever you listen. It sounds silly, but it's still the best way to get the word out and support us in this crazy podcast world. Well, lights are blinking, intermission's over, so grab those snacks and another drink and enjoy the rest of the show.
But they were, by April 20th, he was then aware that some of the co-conspirators had been arrested, because I think they came into contact with people who had newspapers, or they were able to be like, oh, hey, the heat is on, as they would say. And it's interesting because it is said that Booth was surprised to find that there was little public sympathy for his actions.
He thought he was going to be a hero.
He thought he was. And there were actually several newspapers that were, quote, like mainstream news that had really excoriated Lincoln in his life and were critical of his leadership, of him as president. And he thought maybe not everyone would think what he did was amazing and heroic, but he thought there would be much more sympathy than there was. And almost like, you were being condemned. And he's like, wait, but you were critical of the president. And they're like, yeah, critical of leadership, not wanting him killed. Like,
right. We didn't want to kill him.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Like we had some notes. We didn't need him to be murdered. Like, Jesus Christ.
Right. We had notes. That was
Yeah, so he wrote in his journal on April 21st, again, they're trying to figure out how to cross the Potomac River into Virginia. At one point they got completely turned around, and they actually doubled back into Maryland, and they thought they were safe in Virginia. And then they realized, whoopsies, no, we got turned around, and they crossed the river at a point where the river almost folded in on itself.
Yeah,
and so they were still in Maryland. They weren't in Virginia at all.
And there's a point in the Potomac where there are rapids. It's insane. You can't cross it. So we're lucky in a way.
Yeah. Hold on. I gotta find the place where he writes about. I was like, is this it?
As you're talking, I'm building us a trip.
And we're adding this to our murder tour.
Yeah.
So he says, our country owed all our troubles to him. God simply made me an instrument of his punishment. The country is not what it was. This forced union is not what I have loved. I care not what becomes of me. I have no desire to outlive my country.
Wow.
So it's like...
Well, the country was coming to an end.
He really did.
He did. And it was this... I think it was a sincerely held belief that Lincoln specifically, like the Assassin's lyric says by Sondheim, what I did was kill the man who killed my country. And he thought, if I can just take out this one person, maybe slash some of the other leadership, I can at least turn the tide, or I can restore, if not the South, I can restore peace, and I can restore this lifestyle that I thought, again, we talked about in part 1 from childhood, was really, quote, the right way to be, at least in his mind, and was something that I think was maybe not totally unchallenged throughout his life, but definitely he was living in an echo chamber of accolades, of being celebrated as an actor. And you think about it, you have a public figure who, especially in that time, we don't have social media, we don't have the news the way it is now, but you have someone who is an attractive, talented public figure, and maybe they say something a little crazy or a little racist. Are you going to challenge them in the moment? Or you'd be like, that was weird.
Because it goes away.
And that's sort of the end of it. So it seems like he was living in this world where, he was being told that everything he said and did was wonderful. And other than maybe his immediate family members from part 1, we talked about, his older brothers were like, dude, no, Edwin, the hero.
We love you.
We're like, hey, this is terrible. You're wrong. Other than that, it doesn't seem like he had a whole lot of pushback for these beliefs and for his Confederate sympathies and for thinking that Black people were inferior. He was not being challenged regularly on this in any way.
And that's the thing that drove him to change from kidnap to kill. Yeah. Was when Lincoln said
I'm giving Black people the right to vote.
How? Yeah. That just absolutely blows my mind.
Your hatred of another race, his hatred of another race is what drove him to make this decision.
Yeah. And about how also thinking, not just hating this other race, but thinking that by giving another race equality was somehow a threat to him and his way of life. Which, like, my brain doesn't compute that, because, like, that's not how I think. I'm like, why does someone else having rights, that doesn't take away anything from me. It doesn't take away
anything.
Like another, like, good, like, more rights for more people. That should always be, like, a yes and, to put it in, you know, acting terms. Theater terms. But it's like,
we're all
humans. It's not pie. It's not like you pull a slice away, slice from you. Equality is not pie, you know?
No,
it's exactly. Not pie.
It doesn't take anything away from you, but
so
in the journal I've got to read, because I had flagged it. I think this is a good time to read it because it speaks to what we're talking about, which is kind of his mindset. He says, I look now upon my early admiration of her glories, the South, as a dream. My love, as things stand today, is for the South alone, and to her side I go penniless. Her success has been near my heart, and I have labored faithfully to further an object which would more than have proved my unselfish devotion. Heartsick and disappointed, I turn from the path which I have been following into a bolder and more perilous one. Without malice, I make the change. I have nothing in my heart except a sense of duty to my choice. If the South is to be aided, it must be done quickly. It may already be too late. When Caesar had conquered the enemies of Rome and the power that was his menace, the liberties of the people, Brutus arose and slew him. The stroke of his dagger was guided by his love of Rome. It was the spirit of ambition of Caesar that Brutus struck at. Quote, oh, that we could come by Caesar's spirit and not dismember Caesar. But alas, Caesar must bleed for it. I answer with Brutus, he who loves his country better than gold or life.
So even back then,
Brutus!
That's like right before the assassination.
You're not Brutus.
Even back then, men were obsessed with the Roman Empire.
Right?
Yeah.
Oh my God.
White men obsessed by the Romans. But it's so interesting how he is obsessing about Brutus and aligning himself with Brutus, not as an assassin, but as a hero who was sort of like doing what needed to be done. Is wild to me. And the self-delusion to think, like we said, oh, I'm going to be this hero and like everyone's on board with me, right? And then to read in the newspaper, they're like, oh my gosh, you're a criminal. He's like, wait, what? No, I'm a hero. And it's like, no, surprise, motherfucker. Like, you're wanted.
Surprise, motherfucker.
Yeah. As this pursuit is happening, as John Wilkes Booth is realizing that he is not, in fact, surprise, a hero. Surprise. I know, to no one's surprise
Racism
except his own.
Sucks.
Yeah, they're not celebrating you, a racist murder. Shocking. A 9-car funeral train bearing Lincoln's body departed Washington, D.C. on the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad. It was the first stop on a 13-day journey to Springfield, Illinois, which was its final destination. That was where he was going to be buried. So the funeral train made its way westward through 7 states. About 7 million people lined the railroad tracks along the route, and some of them made signs, and they were like saying things like, the sign said things like, we mourn our loss, and he lives in the hearts of the people, and like the darkest hour in the history. And in cities where the train stopped, 1.5 million people came out to view Lincoln in his coffin. So a New York politician and a later president of the New York Central Railroad said, as we sped over the rails at night, the scene was the most pathetic I have ever witnessed. At every crossroads, the glare of innumerable torches illuminated the whole population kneeling to the ground. And another historian said that the journey was, quote, the mightiest outpouring of national grief the world had yet seen. So, like, this funeral train is happening simultaneously with the manhunt. So this is
powerful.
Powerful, yeah. Really, just like this two-ish week period, just a ton going on. So you have at the same time like this national funeral train process happening, and you also have this manhunt going on for Booth and for the co-conspirators. So Booth and Herod finally get a boat, and they're able to cross the Potomac on the night of April 21st. This is actually the part where instead of reaching Virginia, they mistakenly navigated upriver into this weird bend in the Potomac. And so they came ashore again in Maryland on the 22nd. So they spent all night traversing the river, and they're like, okay, finally, we made it. We're in Virginia. We're safe. No. So the 23-year-old Herod, he knew most of the area well. And then he was like, hey, bad news. We're back in Maryland. The good news is here's a farm. Oh, and I recognize it. The guy who lives here is a Confederate sympathizer. So this guy provided the fugitives with food and with a hideout until nightfall. And then they made a second attempt to get across the river into Virginia now that they weren't direction turned. And Booth wrote, with every man's hand against me, I am here in despair. And why? For doing what Brutus was honored for. And yet I, for striking down a greater tyrant than they ever knew, I am looked on as a common cutthroat. So he's he's like obsessing about Brutus and Caesar, and is like writing about this repeatedly.
This was like sounds like a real reality check for him, that people were not like standing in the street.
Yeah, he was shocked. So they finally reached Virginia just before dawn on April 23rd. They made contact with this guy, Thomas Harbin, who Booth had previously been in connection with during the kidnapping plot. So Harbin took Booth and Herod to another Confederate agent in the area named William Bryant, who gave them horses. So they had horses, they were on foot, they took a boat. Now we've got horses in the mix again. So on April 24th, Edward P. Doherty was dispatched from Washington around 2 p.m. with a detachment of 26 Union soldiers to capture Booth in Virginia. So they've got intelligence that, like, hey, we have reason to believe he's in Virginia at this point. He's made it this far.
He's also the most recognizable person in the country.
Right? He's the hottest man in
like,
America.
Have you seen a really good-looking guy come through here?
He's got really good calves.
He might be injured. TBD. So they took a boat down the Potomac and they landed in Virginia that night around 10 p.m. on the 24th. And this was where they're going to come into contact with Booth and Herod at the Garrett farm. So they're in Virginia, but they're not to Richmond yet. They're not to like the Confederate stronghold. So they make their way to this farm, infamously now the Garrett farm. The Garretts were allegedly unaware of Lincoln's assassination. I guess like news travels slow. Like I was like,
travel so fast back then.
Did you
on the telegram as opposed to the Instagram?
Yeah. And again, we're in a more rural area, so it's like maybe you're not like checking the news or lack thereof.
No, it's true. And Richmond's a good 2 hours from DC.
Yeah. So
but don't they have newspapers?
They do, but they weren't coming out like on the daily, and they weren't being delivered to their home. Okay. So you had to go to town to get the newspaper. Booth was introduced to them under an alias. They said he was James W. Boyd, JWB, same initials, nothing to see here. And they said that Herod said he was a Confederate soldier who had been wounded at the siege of Petersburg and was returning home. So very innocent.
Near like Ma and Pa Kettle, right? Because they also don't recognize the celebrity of the time. Like, what's going on here?
Right? He is like people's hottest celebrity.
They're like, Ma, you're a very good-looking Confederate soldier.
You're deeply attractive.
My, what a good-looking man.
Before. Yeah, where have we seen you before? And Booth is like biting his tongue. He's like, I want them to know, but also,
Right.
So this biographer, Thomas Roscoe, he said of the Garrett's subsequent account, nobody knows exactly what Booth said to the Garretts or they to him, because this isn't written down. Nothing's documented. Who's to say the Garretts were just civilians? So they might have known him. They might have been sympathetic. They might have been totally in the dark. Nobody really knows. So at this point, again, the Union Army from DC, they are in pursuit. They have tracked Booth and Herod to Virginia, and they receive intelligence that he is probably hiding out at this farm. So like they're closing in. So just before dawn on April 26th, the soldiers catch up with the fugitives. At this point, Booth and Herod are hiding in the Garrett's tobacco barn.
Okay.
So a tobacco barn is also like tobacco, for those who don't know. You have to, you pick it. It is a plant. You have to hang it up for it to dry, and then you can use it to make tobacco products, like tobacco leaves. They're like big leaves. So you hang them up in bunches, but a tobacco barn specifically for the purpose of drying tobacco was a thing. So the troops are like, hey, we're here. Jig is up. We've got you. You're hiding in the barn.
As they say.
We know you're in there. We've got you surrounded. David Harrod surrendered almost immediately. David Harrod is like, I didn't sign up for this.
I'm done.
I'm done. You got me. I'm surrendering. And remember, David Harrod specifically, not to say that he didn't commit a crime, because he was very much a part of this escape, but like, David Harrod didn't injure anybody. Like, he's part of the plot. He's part of the escape. Booth, though, said at the time of his surrender, I prefer to come out and fight. So Harrod is like, I'm surrendering. It's fine. And Booth is like, no, I'm going to go down swinging. So the soldiers, they don't want to lose any more Union lives to Booth or the South, because this is a military contingent. Like, these are people who were effectively fighting for the Union Army. The war is over, but this isn't the police. This is the military who have gone after them. Booth had multiple guns. He had lots of weapons on him. So they're like, if in the process of arresting him, he starts shooting, we don't want any more casualties. Like, the war is over. We would like to keep it this way. Like, no more lives lost to this absurdity.
Do you know, I have to, I'm so sorry. I don't mean to interrupt you, but I have to say, I don't think I realized that this happened after the war was over. I think that was a little tidbit that I don't think I realized.
Yeah.
I thought agreed.
Yeah.
The timeline, I thought that
it was still happening.
Still
going on.
He was doing it to, yes, right.
And there were places where I will say, to kind of and that, there were places where there were still like battles or skirmishes, because it was like, again, as we've established even with this assassination, word travels slowly. So so the South had surrendered at Appomattox. Officially, the war was over, but there were places where there were still like Confederate troops.
Well, and they didn't. That's why Juneteenth is a holiday. There was 2 years later. There was history in certain areas,
because they're like, we're hanging on, and it's like, we're not doing slavery anymore. You have to stop, and they're like, but we don't want to, and it's like, nope, it's over. Like, you have no excuse. Yeah, exactly. Right. So Booth says, no, I'm going to fight it out. And the Union's like, the soldiers are like, shit. The other thing was they had orders to try to take him alive and to have him
I didn't know that either.
Yeah, they were trying to take him alive because they want him to stand trial
and
for
then
his
hang
crimes,
him.
and then and execute him legally. So like, we don't want to just
like a traitor to the country.
They're like, we don't want to just hunt him down and kill him. Frankly, that would be easy to just shoot him. They could have just opened fire like on the barn, and that would have been that. But they're like, no, we really would like to try to take him alive if at all possible. So if he's saying, I'm going to fight you, they're like, what do we do? So there's a little bit of a stalemate happening. So he's barricaded in the barn. They know he has weapons. They also know he's injured. So they're like, ooh, what should we do here? So their brainy idea was, they're like, well, we're going to set fire to the barn in hopes that that'll smoke him out.
Yep.
So they actually didn't set fire to the barn itself. They set fire around the perimeter of the barn. So they were trying to create a bunch of smoke, essentially make him be like, oh, like, I'm coughing, like, this is really unpleasant. I'm going to come out of the barn so I don't asphyxiate. That was the goal, not to kill him, to get him to come out. And also, smoke, like, I can't see, like, incapacitate him a little bit, maybe. That was the goal. That was the brainy plan. So Booth realizes that the barn is on fire. He's kind of moving around inside the barn. He's pacing. And at this time, Sergeant Boston Corbett shoots him through the wall of the barn.
Oh.
Through like a opening or like a hole or a slat, something. He is shot through the wall of the barn. According to Corbett's later account, he fired at Booth because, quote, the fugitive raised his pistol to shoot at them. You're like, through the door? What? Like,
yeah.
he's in the barn? Like, that feels a little sus. Another report to Secretary of War Stanton said that Corbett shot Booth without order, pretext, or excuse, and recommended that Corbett be punished for disobeying the order to take Booth alive. And
I have to tell you, I thought that he died in the same like barn that he hid out in, like the first, like the doctor that helped him. I thought it was the same barn.
Nope.
I didn't realize he made it to another place.
Different. Yeah. He made it pretty far.
Maybe it's just legend. Didn't he walk out and say something before he like collapsed?
Nope. So we're at that part right now, actually. So,
great.
So Corbett shot Booth. Again, Booth is in the barn. He's still barricaded. Corbett shoots Booth like through the wall of the barn. Booth was actually hit in the back of the head / neck. Some people said it was ironic. It was almost exactly the same spot where he shot Lincoln. The two injuries were almost identical. As
Are
far
you
as, like,
serious?
the entry point. However, he shot Lincoln, the way he shot Lincoln, it was almost like it went, I don't know how to say, it went more through the brain. The way Booth was shot, it went down into his neck.
Oof.
So he was wounded. It says he was shot in the neck. He was actually shot in like his head, but it went downward into his neck, like the trajectory of the shot. So they knew he was shot. He was dragged out of the barn and they dragged him to the porch of the farmhouse. It took him 3 hours to die.
What's the couple's name? Garrett?
Garrett, yeah.
The Garretts are like, now what the heck's all this happening about?
Right? Like you're like getting blood all over our porch. So he's laying on the porch of the farmhouse. The bullet had actually pierced 3 vertebrae in his neck and partially severed his spinal cord, which paralyzed him.
So he couldn't move.
So he's paralyzed. So in his dying moments, he reportedly whispered, "Tell my mother I died for my country." And an interesting thing, he asked, because he couldn't move, he asked for his hands to be brought up to his face so he could see them, because he'd had this obsession like with his hands and like the way his hands looked, and that like his hands were going to do great things. And his last words, he was like, had his hands on his face, and he said, "Useless, useless," were his last words. And he died because he asphyxiated on the blood from his neck wound.
Right.
It's interesting. I looked up maybe what did the useless mean? Did that have special significance? And it seems like it was maybe regret or realization of failure, because he thought initially when he was making the plot that assassinating Lincoln was going to make him this hero, at least in the South. And over the last now 12 days, he has seen that instead of being celebrated, he's this hunted fugitive, and
the South hasn't come back.
No, and it hasn't changed anything. And it really was for nothing, and that his actions were ultimately futile, and now he's dying as a result of that. So in his pockets at the time of his death, there was a compass, a candle, and pictures of 5 women. So he's on the run. He has an actress named Alice Gray, an actress named Helen Western, Effie German, Fanny Brown, who we talked about before.
Yeah.
And the fiance, Lucy Hale, the senator's daughter.
There it is.
And then he also had his diary where he had written of Lincoln's death, "Our country owed all our troubles to him, and God simply made me the instrument of his punishment." So that was one of the last entries, that part of it. So getting into our last part now here, the aftermath. As Stephen Sondheim said, "How could you do it, Johnny? Calling it a cause. You left a legacy of butchery and treason we took eagerly and thought you'd get applause. But traitors just get jeers and boos, not visits to their graves. While Lincoln, who got mixed reviews because of you, John, now gets only raves."
Yeah.
So Booth's body, they wrapped it in a blanket. They tied it to the side of a farm wagon. I'm like, not even in the wagon, like the side of a wagon.
The side?
I know. It's like, Jesus Christ.
Is that so they could parade it, kind of?
No, this was all very anonymously done. I was like, weird detail. They took him to the USS Montauk in the Washington Navy Yard to identify him and also like to do an autopsy. He was positively identified by more than 10 people who knew him. He had some identifying features to make sure, like, yes, this is him. He had a tattoo of his own initials on his left hand.
That's
I was like you do.
Oh my God, what a narcissist.
I know. I was like, your own. Cute. He also apparently he had some sort of distinctive scar on the back of his neck. They said, yep, those markings, that's definitely him. 3 vertebrae were removed during the autopsy to enable physicians to remove the bullet because, again, it had gone down into his neck.
Sure.
Apparently, these bones were later put on display at the National Museum of Health and Medicine in Washington, D.C. I was like, weird choice, but okay.
We had one of those also?
I know.
Didn't know that.
So initially, his body was buried in a storage room at the Arsenal Penitentiary and later moved to a warehouse at the Washington Arsenal in 1867. So I say all this because that Apple TV show Manhunt, they depict this conspiracy theory that Booth's body was like dumped in a river or otherwise in a body of water to keep him from ever being buried or having a grave for people to go and remember him. 'Cause we don't want him to be a hero.
Right.
We don't want anywhere for people to gather. We want to keep this very anonymous. Like, take him out, like dump him in the harbor. Like, we don't care. But his body, it sounds like, was stored by the military. But they're like, we're not going to put him just anywhere, but we're going to hang on to him. So 8 other people were implicated in the assassination and were tried in Washington, D.C. and found guilty. So Mary Surratt, Lewis Powell, David Harrod, George Axelrod were hanged on July 7th, 1865. Mary Surratt being the first woman executed by the U.S. government.
Yeah.
Yep.
That's what I always remember her name. Yeah.
Yep. Samuel Mudd and Samuel Arnold and Michael O'Laughlin were sentenced to life imprisonment. So the Dr. Mudd, like, did he know? Did he not? We don't know. But
wow.
He got life in prison.
Wow.
Yep. Yeah. So it was actually Edmund Spangler, the guy who was like, just arrange for the horse. So like kind of knew, but all he did was arrange for a horse to be around and then told someone else to hold the reins. He was given 6 years in prison. So not nothing.
Yeah.
And then all the other people, Mudd, Samuel Arnold, O'Laughlin died in prison of yellow fever, but Mudd and Arnold, they were eventually pardoned in 1969 by Andrew Johnson. So they got life, but then it was like, just kidding, never mind. You only served 2 years.
That's weird.
Interesting.
I know. So we're going to get into the last little bit here now. I heard on a different podcast about John Wilkes Booth, this was suggested. They're like, so going back to John Wilkes Booth as a lady man, and also, as we said in part 1, a patron of sex workers of the time, did he have syphilis? Did it drive him crazy?
I mean, didn't everyone?
Was it the syphilis?
You know who didn't? Corbett. He didn't.
That's right. He didn't because snip.
That's right.
So just in a quick summary, no. Did he have syphilis? Maybe, maybe not. There's nothing that is ever documented that suggests that he did have syphilis, or at least that he knew he did or was diagnosed with it. Syphilis, like famously, like it can cause madness. But like we said, it's more disorganized insanity. It's not like I made a thoughtful plan to kill the president. That's not how syphilis manifests if you are losing your mind. So as far as that is a reason for why he did what he did, syphilis, no. Also on this other podcast, they talked about like, was he a psychopath? A word we like to bandy about. And myself and this other podcaster sort of were in agreement of like, no, he definitely had an ego.
He did. And he had like delusions of self-grandeur, for sure.
Yeah, he thought he was Brutus.
Right.
Yes. Delusions of grandeur for sure. But other than this incident, like other than, again, pretty big, but besides this assassination plot, there's nothing else to suggest that he had like violent tendencies or showed disregard for other people's like feelings or lives. Like as much as like his father was a violent drunk, that was not true of Booth. So I think what we do see is like a gradual but steady like political radicalization. with a lot of baked in prejudices. Yeah. So I think it's more about a gradual but steady political radicalization, not dissimilar from stuff we've seen in citizens today, with people who have just an extreme set of beliefs that's sort of rooted in this long held prejudice. So it was less about like, oh, was he just crazy, or was he, suffering from some sort of like illness? It's like, no, this was writing on the wall that was frankly a long time coming, and a whole lot of factors converged to make this happen the way it did. But it wasn't insanity. Like, he wasn't, a madman.
He thought he was ordained by God.
Yeah.
Do it.
Yeah. And he thought he was going to be a hero. Mm-hmm. So as for his family, Junius Brutus Booth Jr., older brother, himself was briefly imprisoned in Washington, D.C. after the assassination of Lincoln, because they're like, Booth, like, hey, you're...
Oh, shit.
Yeah, his brother. So at the time of the assassination, he was in Cincinnati. He was like in a show. He's like, I'm just doing a play like I do, like normal. So he was interrogated, but then released. So
oh God,
they're like,
yep, can you imagine? You're just like
living your life,
be or not to be, and they like come in and
in another state, like fully somewhere else. You're like, wait, what? And they're like, we heard your brother
knew something, but
and you don't know,
you don't know, sure.
Yeah. So after the assassination, the infamy associated with the Booth name forced Edwin, the more talented / maybe famous one, abandon the stage for a long time. Like he couldn't work, because they're like, you / your family by association, you're all tainted by this crime. Yeah. So
sorry,
Edwin,
Bill.
Yeah, and
you're
Edwin.
Out.
Yeah, Edwin had been feuding, remember? Like, he kicked Booth out of his home and said, you're not welcome here. He had totally cut ties with John Wilkes Booth before the assassination, like well before, and disowned him. And after the assassination, he refused to have John's name spoken in his house. Wow. Like, he continued to just be like, he is dead to me in every way. He ultimately made his return to the stage, ironically, at the Winter Garden Theater. So that's where they did the benefit. Yep, almost a year later in 1866, playing the title role in Hamlet, which was his signature role. In 1969, Edwin finally acquired his brother John's body. I don't know if he had a change of heart, or if he was just like, look, like, can we just bury him somewhere? Because I think they had
with this.
Well, they had a family plot. So he wrote to Andrew Johnson, who was the president at that time, and just said, hey, can I have the body? Like, can we bury him? Johnson gave him the remains, and Edwin had them buried unmarked, but they are at the family plot in Baltimore. So they're like, we're going to put him in with the family, but we're not going to like do a headstone or let people know like specifically where he is, because again, like, we don't want this to become like a shrine or a place where people, for nefarious purposes gather. So this is the last interesting detail about poor Edwin. I'm like, poor Edwin. So
poor Edwin.
In 1879, Mark Gray, a traveling salesman from Canuck, Iowa, fired 2 shots from a pistol at Edwin Booth. Booth was playing the title role in Richard II at McVickers Theater in Chicago, Illinois. And he was on stage. He was actively like doing the show. So it was the final act. And this guy, Gray, he gave his motive was he's like, oh, Edwin Booth did something like bad to a friend of mine. So Gray's shots were fired from a distance of 34 feet. They missed Booth, and they just like hit the stage floor. They didn't injure anybody. So this would-be assassin, he was jailed. Booth was like, I have no idea who this guy is. Like, he didn't know him. He was just like a random citizen. And then a letter to a woman in Ohio was found on Gray's person, and the correspondence affirmed Gray's intent to murder Booth. So this guy had a plan. Gray was like, I'm going to kill Edwin Booth, and I told a friend about it. like you do.
Oh my God.
The attempted assassination occurred on Shakespeare's supposed birthday, because we don't know exactly, but it occurred on Shakespeare's birthday, and it came at a time when Booth was receiving various death threats by mail. So like, this followed him, like his brother's crime followed him for the rest of his life. But his final performance was, again, his signature role of Hamlet in 1891. And that was how he closed out his career, but it never really recovered. Like he was always followed by
he was always John Wilkes Booth's
the whole family was, but specifically Edwin, because he was probably the most famous and successful before that.
Well, and he was the most famous before his brother assassinated Abraham Lincoln.
Right. Yeah. And like we said, he was also incredibly talented as an actor. Whereas like John Wilkes Booth, it was like, you're good, but you're mostly hot. Like that's a big part of your appeal. It wasn't like that he was as talented.
Right. It's like if Meryl Streep had a hot younger sister.
Meredith Streep.
I'm pretty good. I'm okay. And like, look at my calves.
But I'm mostly.
And then Meryl it's forever. We're never going to get to see her again.
Right. Horrible. And Meryl's like, son of a bitch. Like, could you not? Like, I told you not to.
Sophie's Choice. How dare you?
How dare you? I'm Academy Award winner, Meryl Streep. I will finish out with, I've got 2 parts to this. So, recapping, finishing out with Assassins. Listen to the stories. Hear it in the songs. Angry men don't write the rules, and guns don't right the wrongs. Hurts a while, but soon the country's back where it belongs. And that's the truth. Still and all, damn you, Booth. So it's interesting because I had obviously looked at Assassins quite a bit, at least as far as the lyrics for this song, to kind of shape our 2-part episodes here. But in the script I have of Sondheim's Assassins, there is a preface in this published script from Andre Bishop, and this is from 1991. So he wrote this the year that Assassins made its Broadway debut. And I thought this was a great way to close out the episode. It's a direct quote. He writes, "Seeing America through the stories of its villains instead of its heroes was an unsettling and unusual experience. At the end of the performance, an audience member said to his companion, 'I liked it, but who are you supposed to feel for?' She replied, her eyes filled with tears, 'Us. You're supposed to feel for us.' And that was the power of this show. You went out into the night thinking how much you loved your country, despite how troubled it had become. And you felt happy and sad to be an American."
Oh, man. Yep.
Aww.
And I'm crying.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
And that is it, ladies and ladies.
Damn you, Sondheim.
Damn it. Starting off season 2 with a bang. No pun intended.
Excellent job, Ashley.
Wow, that was fantastic.
And a whole left turn into the world of Boston Corbett
may or may not make the final cut. Listeners, if this does not make the final edit, go listen to our Patreon aside on Boston Corbett, which is a whole situation.
Fascinating. Learn about the true Mad Hatter.
Oh my God.
It's so fascinating to me. All of the things, because John Wilkes Booth is obviously everyone knows his name.
Yeah.
Everyone knows his name. And it's so interesting to me, that whole infamous, obviously, but to learn the true story about it. And like I said, I thought after he broke his leg, he went to that doctor and that was it. I thought that was it. I didn't realize he was on the run for so long.
12 days, which is, yeah.
And as you're telling the story, and he said he got paralyzed and he looked at his hands and he said useless. Like, I don't like this guy. I hate what he did. I don't sympathize with him at all. And still, when he said useless, I was like, oh.
And I think
because he's right.
He's right. And I don't know, we'll never know, but in that moment as he was dying, because he had 12 days, like we talked about, to have this realization of like, oh my God, this didn't go as I planned. Oh my God, I didn't change anything. Oh my God, people aren't for me. And did he, in his final moments, have the realization of like, this was wrong. Like, did you know, had he not been fatally wounded, like, would he have had a change of heart, or would he have said, you know what, I wish I hadn't done this? Because like even in his journal and some of his writings that we excerpted for this episode, he kind of talks about how like he wasn't happy to be assassinating the president. Like, he wasn't excited by this. He thought like this was coming from a place of vengeance, but it wasn't coming from a place of like, oh wow, like this is going to be great. It was coming from a place of what he felt like. He talked about like Brutus and Caesar endlessly of like, this is necessity to save my country. And then he saw how futile it was. And I think you're right, Jen. I think by the end he was just completely broken by what he had done.
It's insane. For everyone's information, the Garrett farm no longer exists.
Oh.
It's 3 hours from where I live, or where I grew up. So it can be a part of our tour.
How non-existent is it? Like, can we drive by like where it generally was, or is it now like a Taco Bell? Like, what are we talking about?
Literally drive by where it was, because it's now the median in the middle of a road.
Oh God!
Christ. Okay.
So we can literally, there's a marker. We can literally pull off the road,
drive by.
There.
Nothing to see.
Nothing to see here, except there's a marker. The Surratt Museum exists, and obviously Ford's Theater, and also Dr. Mudd's house is still there.
It's still there. Wow, interesting. Mm-hmm. Jen, if the people want to follow us, where can they follow us? And do we know what our next episode we're recording is? What are we doing? What happens now?
What's going on in season 2? Let me tell you. I have everything up and ready to go. So if you want to follow us, you can follow us on Facebook at Life Upon the Wicked Stage. You can follow us on Instagram at Wicked Stage Pod. You can also follow us on Patreon for free at Life Upon the Wicked Stage, or you can join us starting at $3 a month for the first tier. And then it goes $3, $5, $10, $20 per month to get all kinds of cool content and free merch and lots of fun, ridiculous things that we're figuring out what it's going to be for you as we go along. We're still learning ourselves.
We're making it up
making it up as we go.
Much like John Wilkes Booth's lines in his early career.
Correct.
I will also add,
much more seriously.
We do. We absolutely do.
We do.
I will also add, and I think this is probably news to the two of you. I'll say this in real time. Listeners, there's really no content there yet, but that might change. We also have a Blue Sky account, as many people I just made it. As many people are deciding not to be on Facebook anymore. Great. We've never been on X Twitter, but we have a Blue Sky account. There's nothing on it, but we do have one. So if you'd like to follow us there, we're also on Blue Sky as Wicked Stage Pod.
Fantastic.
Also, the $3 is a good deal, because in 1850, $3 then would be $122.90.
What a deal! What
the bargain price?
What
a deal of riches!
What a deal! So,
what is our next episode? I can't remember. I haven't looked at the doc. Like, what are we doing?
Is it me?
It's not you, because Olivia is very busy and important. So I'm taking over next week, and we are doing Olivia Thomas and the Haunting of the New Amsterdam Theater.
Haunting, you say?
Haunting. It's a little bit of a haunting and a scandal. So it's a little bit of both, which we love. And obviously it's in a theater, so it's a little bit of everything.
Incredible.
Followed by Olivia, and I'll just give a little teaser. She's doing Murder at the Met.
Yes.
And then,
I've never heard of, somehow contemporary crime.
Yeah, very contemporary.
It is wild.
It's wild. We got some really good stuff coming up for you, so you're gonna want to join our Patreon.
Season two is off to a great start, if I do say so myself. But we have a lot planned for this one.
Yeah,
I'd like to maybe wrap it up with one of my favorite quotes. Relating back to John Wilkes Booth, and it's, other than that, Mrs. Lincoln, how did you like the play?
Perfect, Olivia. And scene. Well done. All right.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of the Wicked Stage Pod.
Follow us on Instagram and check out our Patreon for more exclusive content.
These deliciously wicked episodes drop every other Friday, so make sure you subscribe or follow and don't get left waiting in the